All right, Bryce, let's get into it. So, speaking of hate, there are some people who our brother Cortez likes to call the Bron sexuals who are kind of upset this week that Dr. J didn't name LeBron James as one of his top players on his first team selection or his second team selection. How do you feel about the Bron sexuals being upset at NBA and ABA legend and street ball legend Dr. J?
Well, if that is the section of fans or the people that are vocal about being upset about Dr. J's opinions, um, it trends because it's probably an age thing. It's getting to where no matter what your opinion is, if you go against like the social majority that's on the internet, because that's the loudest, then it's like it creates drama for some reason, and so all these young kids love LeBron James so much. And I'm a fan as well, but I mean, we're talking about an opinion of someone. He's a legend, so it carries weight. Like people listen to him because he knows what he's talking about. And so, but the man's picking his all-time favorite, like his all-time two teams. Like that's fine. A lot of the people he's played with, some he even like he just said before the podcast, he didn't even pick Charles Barkley that he played with. So it seemed like it's pretty like top tier. I saw Oscar Robinson on the name. MJ. It's like there's a few people on there that's like just complete NBA legends. I'm not saying LeBron isn't that, but there's a lot to pick from, and it's an opinion. It's the man's opinion. So for fans to get upset about it, they can fuck off.
Oh, we're being flagrant today. I love it.
like,
We're,
like
we're gonna
it's
offend
just
everybody.
it's just annoying. Like people are allowed to have their opinions. If you don't like it, you can fuck off. Like I don't get it anymore. Like I'm getting to the point where a lot of this, and it leads like towards like cancel culture in a way. You know how like people get upset with something someone said. This is like the lightest example of that. But the fact that it's like a news article that people have to talk about it.
Yeah.
10 years ago, people wouldn't have talked about this because it's a non-factor, or 20 years ago, and I don't think it's like a softening of like some of that is like a softening of society, I guess you could call it. I don't know what you call it, but either way, people talk about it more, and I don't understand it. Like you're not allowed to have a different opinion. You're not allowed to not have LeBron James on your two all-time list or two team all-time list. Like, come on.
Yeah.
And if I was like, well, Dr. J doesn't have to speak on it, but it's like it's just silly. It's silly that we have to address it or that people got mad or upset about it to begin with.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that. And then, yeah, we had news articles. It was a podcast interview, and then we had news articles about it. There were segments done on the various sports shows. I know Stephen A. Smith was like, I totally disagree with Dr. J, whatever. But here's the list. So for Dr. J's imaginary NBA first team, he would have Oscar Robertson, Jerry West, Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, and Elgin Baylor. That's tough. That's really tough. For his second team, he would have Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Karl Malone, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Still tough. Still tough. The weakest link on this list is Karl Malone. And with all due respect to Karl Malone, because he's one of the greatest NBA players
Mm-hmm.
ever and the number two scorer in the history of the NBA, and he's the weakest one on this list. Um,
Well,
maybe not.
also real quick, don't mean to cut you off. Dr. J picked positions on team. Like who was his small forwards? He picked Larry Bird, and who was
Yeah.
the first one?
Well, his positions were a little off. Oscar, forgive me, Oscar Robinson really was a small forward, and also Elgin Baylor was as well. But for the first team, he has two centers in Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell, so he kind of took a little
Yeah,
took a little leeway with that one. His second team is more traditional. The small
yeah,
forward is Larry Bird. The power forward is Karl Malone. And your center is Kareem. Um, but the first team was a little different.
yeah.
Um,
But it's still with the talent. It's like it's hard to like pick against those old legends. But I
right.
mean, regardless, it's just like Uh, that's fine. Like, what were you gonna have to say about it after naming the players? Like, how do
Well,
you feel about his picks? Because it's hard. Like you said, it's tough.
yeah,
Both teams are tough.
it's a tough list. Like I said, Karl Malone is the weakest link, and like I said earlier, I was surprised that Charles Barkley wasn't on that list. But hey, if he would have did let's play devil's advocate. If he would have did a third team, I'm pretty sure Charles Barkley would have been on there. One teammate that he had, I'm pretty sure Moses Malone would have been on there. His other teammate that he won a championship with in Philly, and Karl Malone, forgive me, LeBron James would have been on that list as well. So you would have had LeBron at the small forward, Charles at power forward, Moses Malone at the center. And if it was me picking, I would probably have a point guard such as John Stockton and then Kobe on there. So here's another dynamic. No one's mad that Kobe's not on this list, but the Sexuals are mad that LeBron isn't on this list. So that's something that people need to think about as well. Why is there not an uproar with Kobe Bryant, who, in my opinion, is on the same echelon as LeBron James ever was? So
I
I,
think
I
it's a generational thing. Like
yeah,
the majority of the Kobe fans are a little bit older. They're like they're not worried about that.
mm,
Like, well, not to say they're not worried about it, but at least they don't have the outrage and the outcry as the LeBron fan base.
so another reason why Dr. J said that he left LeBron out is because, and I quote, he's the guy who led the charge in terms of super teams. So this has been a hit and miss as well. I don't agree with that. There's always been super teams in the NBA, be it by draft or trade or free agency. So I don't necessarily agree with that. The Boston Celtics in the '80s was a super team. The Lakers in the '80s and '90s were a super team. We've had super teams throughout the history of the NBA. So there is a false narrative that LeBron ushered this in. We've seen super teams be successful. We've also seen super teams fail. I tell you a lot. When I was a kid, there was a super team in Houston: Hakeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, Charles Barkley. They didn't play together long because they were older. But in today's standards, that would be a super team, and they failed. So it has happened before. Um, how do you feel about this false narrative that LeBron James ushered in a super team because he went to Miami to join forces with Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh?
Um, Once again, I feel like fell prey to the times
Mhm.
and like this like tunnel vision kind of thing. It's we have it all in our face so much more because of the access to these players. You know, LeBron is one of the most vocal like players or athletes to lead a sport in a long time, and that's because of the timing of when he came up. Everything he's done is more in our face, and I think that's something that the newer, younger athletes have to worry about more is more media exposure, things like that, just because of the access and how much like interaction they can have personally on some of these platforms. So I think for all the good fame and was it like success LeBron has had, and for those things that have fueled his career, it can be like just as negative. So the fact that like people want to say, or some people want to suggest that LeBron James like ushered in this era of super teams, I think they're just kind of falling into like the timing of the situation, like I guess tunnel vision a little bit, like I said earlier, of what's going on right now. It's like more in your face than it used to be. It's that's my opinion. Other than that, it's just people forgetting what used to come before it. Because I mean, for Dr. J to list those players, and as his all-time team, it's like he's remembering those situations, and then to like not remember this other thing or not to see it that way just seems a little odd. Like he's seeing one thing for how he wants to see it. It's a perfect example of why we shouldn't take it too seriously. These people's opinions is like that's just what he thinks, and he's subject to forgetting things too. It's just like you said, you just brought up a bunch of examples of super teams. It's like, but what makes LeBron James different, I think, is the timing and the exposure. People forget, but you just brought up a bunch of examples. So I don't see how he could be labeled as that. It's just, I think, people get caught up in the situation or whatever.
Yeah. Um, of course, I benefited personally from LeBron coming to Miami. I don't have a problem with the quote unquote super team term. I just understand that this isn't a new thing and it's always happened. And just because you put these teams together don't necessarily mean that they're going to be successful. One example I forgot was the mid 2000s Lakers, where you had Kobe, Shaq, Karl Malone, and Gary Payton. On paper, that team should have won all 82 games in the season, and they got to the finals and fizzled out against the Detroit Pistons, who was a much weaker team at that time. So just because you put the boys together doesn't mean you automatically going to win a championship. But I'm all for players coming together in the right circumstance. I know you didn't like KD going to Golden State. You know, that's been well documented. Um, I'm kind of when it comes to him going to Brooklyn with Kyrie and the team, but it happens, you know. So
Now,
we'll
I
see.
do think because of like the player agency, like the ability, seems like players have more independence or more ways to figure out how to get to places they want to go, or they have better contracts for themselves. Whatever it is, it seems like players are going to the teams or playing with the people that they want to play with more than they used to.
Mhm.
And maybe LeBron James did kind of start the idea that players had more independence. I don't know, but I do feel like the super teams come together more frequently or faster, or are coming together at other times when there's another super team out there. Like there's a few of them right now, you could argue, and before I think they were a little more spread out. But I think that just has to do with, like I said, the way the players are able to negotiate and move around more at their own free will now compared to the old contracts or whatever was holding them back before. So maybe we get more super teams now, and maybe LeBron James has had effect on that for sure. But I wouldn't, like you said, I wouldn't necessarily say that the super team is something new just because of LeBron James.
Yeah, it's not, and he did, to put a cap on it. He did bring more freedom to player empowerment and player movement. And here's a story that you might not know about. Of course, we know the 2004 draft class: Braun, Wade, Bosch, and even Melo. So their rookie contracts are very similar and could expire at the same time. So those boys got together, all four of them. They got together and was like, okay, this is what we're gonna do when our rookie contract is up, and then our next contract we're gonna take a shorter deal, which would give us more flexibility for our big contract. Melo was the only one that didn't agree to it. The other three agreed to it. Melo didn't agree to it. So when in the summer of 2010, when you had Wade, Bosch, and LeBron become free agents, if Melo would have followed their lead, he would have been a free agent then too, because Chicago was knocking on his door. So when Chicago missed out, because Chicago tried to pair Wade and LeBron, but they couldn't make the money work. So Miami was like, hey, we can do Wade, LeBron, and Bosh. So that's how that move happened. But Chicago was actually in the running for that. What if Chicago would have got Carmelo Anthony and paired him with Derrick Rose? Just think about that.
Yeah.
Just think about that. So Melo didn't like the idea of taking less money for a bigger payday down the road when the others did. And look at
Mm-hmm.
how Carmelo's career has gone, and then look at how Wade and Bosh and Braun's career has gone. No
Mm-hmm.
shots at Carmelo Anthony, but which route would you have taken?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
hindsight is 2020. But I remember when me and Gerald, when we were younger and we saw this happening, we were like, Melo, what the fuck are you doing? Like, it's a good idea what LeBron had. Like
Mm-hmm.
he should have fell in line with that. But he took more money at the time with Denver. He signed a huge extension. You saw how it ended in Denver. He went to New York. Yes, he got paid in New York, but then he started falling apart. His body started failing
Yeah.
him. So, whew, that was a lot.